So if you've been following New World and we're like only 1 month away and looking forward to what you would hope would be a good PvP game, New World comes in with yet another disappointment, with their second pushback being to the spring of 2021. So New World was set to release on August 25th, and as a result of not knowing what their game wants to be, they've pushed their game back yet again. Obviously, some people think that this is a good idea. While sometimes pushing a game back can be a good idea, I don't think it's because they want to make the game as best as possible. It's more likely that because they've flip-flopped back and forth between what they want their game to be, that in essence their game turned out to be mediocre. Just like Crucible. Crucible is a very good example of a game that it doesn't know what it wants to be. And as a result of being released too early and not very polished, it's literally gone back to the drawing board. So I'm assuming Amazon doesn't want that to happen with New World. And if you're also looking forward to their new game, because they're also working on Lord of the Rings, this is kind of indicative of what's going on with games nowadays. So if you've been thinking, well, Amazon has, Amazon has access to a lot of resources. Amazon really shouldn't be struggling this badly when it comes to deciding what they want to do. And unfortunately, this is what you see nowadays with a lack of leadership. This is as a result, we will be changing our launch date and correspondingly our final beta test to the spring of 2021. So that's say at least a good 6 months away. Who knows if it's going to release in the beginning. So we're looking at a good 6 to 9 months away. So it's hard for me to imagine that something that was pushed because they were just almost done and they're like, nope, sorry, we need another 6 to 9 months. And it's like, what? This is proud of the hard work that the team has done making the game ready for launch with the features we intended for release. So originally New World was intended to be this very hardcore PvP game. A bunch of people cried in the chat and for the people who were in their closed alphas, saying that the game was too hard. It's too hard. We're getting killed. They're killing us at the starter zones. So instead of actually coming up with unique ways or old ways, for example, like in Lineage, where you'd had a PK system, right? So if you PK'd someone, then you had the chance of dropping your gear because you would fly, you would go red, right? So normal characters, their character names would be white. When you flagged against someone, it would turn purple, indicating that you wanted to initiate into a fight. And if you then PK'd that person, then you would gain karma, and then your character name would turn red, and anybody could flag against you and then not have their name turn purple. And so that was the way that they handled basically PKing, even if it was like PKing lobbies. And then the community kind of basically rallied around people who were like, if a bunch of lobies were being killed by a bunch of high levels, then they would just literally just type in chat that, such and such high level was basically griefing, and other people would show up, and this happened all the time. And so that basically happened all the time, where you'd have high levels or similar levels, or a bunch of people would gather up and try to kill this individual that was PKing. And it often created content because then other guilds would show up, and then enemy guilds would show up. So it actually created a lot of player-driven content. And of course, all this was removed in New World, especially having some form of a karma system or a bounty system, which was part of New World's original intention for PvP, and then subsequently got removed because of all the crying and care bearers who can't handle being griefed. And so it goes on to say, as is part of the MMO, it says we have examined the feedback we've received over the last several months from our alpha audience. We saw that players like the game and they would like to see even more of it. In particular, we want to ensure that the most dedicated players have plenty of middle and end game experience as they venture through our Aeternum. So this is So this is primarily related to PvE, right? So New World originally intended to be a PvP game, and then they said they went and did 180 and said we're going to be a PvE game and we're going to sprinkle a little bit of PvP. So a game that was primarily for its entire development was designed for PvP basically did a 180. And of course, for PvE, you constantly have to have content to basically keep the individual amused. In PvP, not so much, right? A perfect example is like Fortnite. People are just literally there playing basically very similar maps with not very much change, maybe some tweaks to weapons here and there, but for the most part, no amazing and drastic content changes. And yet people have been playing this game for quite some time now. Same thing with Apex. It's primarily because what changes is your player experience against other players. Your player experience with PvE mobs does not change because they act in the same exact way over and over and over again. Same thing with dungeons. No matter how difficult the dungeon is, once you know the mechanic, it basically becomes very easy. And so this is what pushes development back in PvE games like this. And that's why most of these games continually have to update every couple of months. They have to put out new PvE content because once you understand the mechanics of something, it becomes very easy and boring. And you basically have to feed the little hamster all over again to basically get these individuals to stay in your game. Not so much with PvP. The Elder Scrolls PvP is a perfect example where literally almost nothing has been changed in Open World Cyrodiil for basically the past 5 years, and yet people are still playing against each other, still competing against each other in both an open world and of course and in a battleground setting, and of course in dueling. And yet we have seen very few changes in that respect. But what is it that continues to drive players is the competitiveness behind it, the competitive spirit behind competing against one another. And this is what New World failed to understand, and which is why yet again it gets pushed back. It's very similar to why their other game failed, why Crucible was a hardcore failure, because it basically had some elements of MOBA, some elements of a shooter, and zero elements of a competitive spirit, which is why it failed and had to go back to the drawing board. And hopefully Amazon Studios will recognize that and make the changes, because this game more than likely will also fail in that iteration if you are looking for MMO PvP. If you're looking for an MMO that has solid PvP, basically your only option nowadays is WoW. WoW, and probably going to be in WoW Classic, not in retail. And this is the same thing that most of us who are looking for a really solid MMO, looking for good PvP, we were hoping that New World was going to be it. Fortunately, it looks like that is not going to be the case. And of course, it's going to be hyped because it's a new game. So of course, it's going to look nice and flashy. It's going to have up-to-date graphics. But will it have what MMO players are looking for? For those who are looking for PvP, it's a real big question mark. It goes on to say, we want our players to feel completely immersed in the game and know that our studio stands for quality and lasting gameplay you can trust. And that means added time to get things where we want them before we fully release. So we're passionate about the game we've been making, and want to add more features and content before we share it with a wider audience. And right there is the cue that there's not enough content to hold PvEers. This is as a result of New World going in the direction of more PvE mobs that are very easy to kill, especially once you learn the mechanics. What really would create a lot of interesting player experience would be gearing the game towards PvP, and then subsequently adding PvE that you have to PvP over. This is one of the things that made Lineage 2 very interesting. It's very similar to Ion, and Ion as well. Most of the content in Ion, especially when it came to certain bosses, you had to PvP over. And of course, that allowed for huge amounts of player-driven content to be added between guild versus guilds, other rivalries, very similar in Lineage 2 back in the days, where Lineage 2 had a guild versus guild feature, and they were basically world bosses that dropped special items. There were certain dungeons that you could level in, and a lot of PvP took place in those dungeons because individuals wanted to level, or someone would come into your leveling area and you basically fight against one another. It would cause brawls to go back and forth, and it created a lot of player-driven content. It was a very interesting game. I hope that they would make a new release for it, as it is, of course, designed by NCSoft Studios. So we'll have to wait and see. So unfortunately, if you were looking forward to playing New World next month, because the MMO market is super dry, there's literally nothing except for old school WoW and a broken ESO, and maybe some Final Fantasy if you're not a PvPer, then sorry to disappoint you, but New World will not be around for another good 6 to 9 months. And we'll have to wait and see if it's even worth playing then. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and take care. God bless.